Revolutionary fervor is an interesting thing. It's intoxicating when things are going your way, and absolutely terrifying when they aren't. But what happens to the 1% when that revolutionary fervor turns against them? Let's find out. When you think of the French Revolution, what comes to mind? Perhaps it's the storming of the Bastille or Marie Antoinette's ill-fated romance with her lover, Axel Vauthier. Maybe it's the tennis court oath or the March on Versailles. But if you ask us, the first thing that pops into our head is the infamous guillotine. The revolutionary tribunal set up during the French Revolution was responsible for sending thousands of aristocrats and clergy to the guillotine, all in the name of justice. And some of France's biggest names were sent there thanks to this revolutionary invention. But while the image of the guillotine may be the first thing that pops into your head when you think of the French Revolution, it wasn't actually the most common method of execution. In fact, only about 2,600 people were sent to the guillotine between 1793 and 1794. Which is less than 1% of the total number of people killed during the Revolution. Instead, the vast majority of those accused of crimes against the Revolution were simply shot or drowned. So then why is the guillotine so representative of the French Revolution? Well, it helps that it looked like nothing else at the time. There were no other devices that could cut off a human head quite so quickly and cleanly, making the guillotine a unique instrument of terror. Not only did it provide a quick death, at least theoretically, but it also allowed for public spectacle. As the condemned person approached the guillotine, crowds would gather and watch as their head was severed from their body. This public spectacle was part of what made the guillotine such a powerful tool of the revolution. It allowed the revolutionaries to show the people of Paris that they were serious about punishing those who opposed the revolution. As you might imagine, the threat of execution by guillotine had a pretty chilling effect on the population of Paris. Many aristocrats fled the city in order to escape the guillotine, while others tried to hide their identity by wearing disguises. Some even went so far as to buy their own guillotines in order to use them as a means of self-defense. While the guillotine was certainly a brutal weapon, it was also a relatively humane one, compared to the other methods of execution that were available at the time. For example, drowning was a common form of punishment for those convicted of crimes against the state. People convicted of crimes such as treason, sedition, or rape were often drowned in a nearby river or canal. The idea was that by drowning them, they were being punished in the same way as a criminal who had committed a crime against society itself. The executioners would often drag the condemned through the streets before throwing them into the water, adding to the humiliation and terror of the event. If you thought that the guillotine was scary, just imagine being dragged through the streets by an angry mob while they hurl insults and curses at you. Then picture yourself being thrown into a canal to drown. That's not exactly pleasant, is it? So while the guillotine was certainly a fearsome instrument of justice, it was also relatively quick and clean compared to other methods of execution that were available at the time. The real horror of the guillotine lay not in its design, but in the way that it was used. The French Revolution was a time of great upheaval and terror, and those who fell victim to the guillotine were often innocent victims of circumstance. But how did the 1% fare after the French Revolution? Well, let's start at the beginning. Before the French Revolution, the 1% in France were living a life of luxury and privilege. They owned most of the land and property in the country and had a significant amount of political power. However, as the revolution gained momentum, things began to change. The once mighty nobles and clergy found themselves under attack from the revolutionaries, who wanted to create a more equal society, and as we all know, things didn't end well for them. As the revolution progressed, the 1% began to realize that they were in danger. Many fled France altogether, hoping to escape the wrath of the revolutionaries. Others tried to hide, hoping that if they could just lay low for a while, things would eventually settle down. But as we all know, this was not the case. The revolutionaries were not interested in compromise, and they were willing to go to any lengths to achieve their goals. And then there were those who tried to fight back. Some nobles formed militias in an effort to defend their property and way of life. But they were no match for the revolutionaries, who were fueled by anger and a desire for a better future. As the revolutionaries gained more and more power, the 1% found themselves under attack on all sides. They were being hunted down and executed by the revolutionaries, and even those who managed to escape were never safe. The revolutionaries had a network of spies and informants, and they were always on the lookout for former members of the 1%. In the end, the 1% were completely wiped out. Those who didn't flee France were executed or imprisoned, and even those who did flee were never able to live a life of luxury and privilege again. They were forced to live in hiding, always looking over their shoulder, wondering when the revolutionaries might catch up to them. One of the most famous examples of a member of the 1% being hunted down and executed was the former Queen Marie Antoinette. She was a target of the revolutionaries from the very beginning, and she was eventually executed by guillotine in 1793. Another example is the Marquis de Sade, who was a nobleman and writer who was accused of supporting the enemies of the revolution. He was imprisoned several times during the Revolution, and he was finally executed in 1794. These are just two examples of the many members of the 1% who were hunted down and executed during the French Revolution. But what about those who were able to escape? Well, they fared no better. Once the revolution was over and the 1% was wiped out, those who had escaped were now seen as traitors. They were accused of stealing from France and they were never able to return home. Many of them spent the rest of their lives in exile, living in poverty and obscurity. So what happened to the 1% after the French Revolution? They were hunted down, executed, or fled to exile and lived in poverty. The French Revolution was a time of great upheaval and terror, and no one was safe. Whether you were a member of the 1%, a revolutionary, or somewhere in between, the events of the revolution would have a profound impact on your life. But it wasn't all bad news for everyone. While the 1% was being hunted down and executed, the middle class was rising to power. The bourgeoisie, or middle class, had long been resentful of the privileges enjoyed by the 1%, and they saw the revolution as a chance to seize power and wealth for themselves. And seize it they did. The bourgeoisie became the new 1%, and they enjoyed a period of great prosperity and power. Today, the French Revolution is remembered as a time when the people rose up and overthrew the oppressive regime of the 1%. It's a story of courage, revolution, and the pursuit of liberty. But behind the heroism and triumph, there's another story. A story of terror, paranoia, and desperation. A story of the 1% being hunted down and executed, imprisoned or fled to exile, and lived in poverty. What do you think? How do you think the 1% handled the French Revolution? Do you think they should have fought back? Let us know your thoughts. Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and check out these other videos. We think you'll like them.